Hello, Mr. Pletta. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Thanks for meeting with me, Dr.
Well,
Brett.
no worries. Thanks so much for signing up for a math one-to-one. And let's get right into it because I know that your time is really valuable. And I'm just going to get started by letting you know that when you filled out your calendar invite, I saw that you wrote this problem of practice. You said that you need help with getting students to write expressions and equations from real world scenarios. Is that still the case?
Yeah, definitely. I had just finished up like a lesson on writing expressions, and I know that like they're gonna still need to do that. And then moving forward, I know like in the next unit it'll be writing equations from real world problems. So this is definitely like kind of a pain point. So this is I'm really glad that we get to kind of talk through it.
All right, cool. Awesome. So what are you noticing in your students in terms of like when they're faced with expressions and equations so far? Like what do you know? Yeah, here you see you have this word stamina and you want to build their stamina.
Yeah, it just like they kind of if they're not like they much prefer going to the just procedural ones, and when they get
Mhm.
to those word problems and they're you know when it's their turn to practice, they're just really kind of either turning off or they're not sure what to do, they're raising their hand a lot, like kind of just asking for a lot of assistance in the word problems, or they're just like not like there's a lot of incorrect answers to coming in as far as like the expression that they need to write. So
All
I think
right.
there's definitely confusion and just like the stamina, meaning they're just like kind of giving up after a while and asking for help pretty quickly.
Okay. All right. So they're looking for you to kind of like guide them through. That happens a lot with students. Do you have a question or a particular problem from your book that you would be able to share that we could dig into?
Yeah, for sure. I actually have the session notes pulled up, or well, the session notes, yeah, I see you shared with me, have those pulled up, but I have my curriculum here. And there's a couple questions I was like, these were ones that really were like tough ones. So, and then one I also see, so I have like the writing expressions. That was the one that it was on their exit ticket, and they just really struggled with it.
Okay.
Didn't do very well overall as like as a class. And then the writing equation one is when I teach writing equations. That's an exit ticket as well that I feel like might be tough for them. So
Okay.
these might be good ones for us to work from.
Cool. All right. So let's dig into the second one, the writing equations lesson. So you're telling me that the students are kind of like getting um, stuck at, or they're feeling like they're not that they're looking for your help. So what's really cool about numberless word problems, and it's funny because whenever I say numberless word problems to teachers, they're like, "Well, I'm a math teacher. How can you take out the number?"
Right.
Numberless
Definitely
word
surprised.
problems. Okay, so if we take this and we take the same problem and we make it into a numberless word problem, what it does is it forces the students to think about the relationships between between like what's happening in the problem. So what I'm
Okay.
going to do here
That's
is I'm going to say so like instead of, I'm just going to get rid of these numbers right now, and then we're going to kind of co-create this together. Okay. So I'm just deleting the numbers. So let's talk about how a student might make sense of this and how taking the numbers out kind of changes the game a little bit. So go ahead, Christian, you read the word problem aloud so that you can kind of get yourself into the problem.
okay. Taxi cab service charges a flat fee. We don't know. Plus an additional, we don't know, per mile. Show the relationship between the total cost and the number of miles. Write an equation to model the relationship.
Okay. So right off the bat, the students know that there's a flat fee, and you might have to, I mean, do you think the students know what flat fee means?
Some do, some don't. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where like getting them to maybe think about like what a taxi like situation is if they've experienced that. I almost wonder even now just looking at it, like should I change it to Uber? Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the students might know Uber better.
I mean, they know what a taxi is, but
Of course,
um,
but they know how it works. I don't know.
they know how a taxi
That's where
works.
I think.
Do the students know how a taxi works? Well, I don't know, but this is a good opportunity for them to understand flat fee because they're gonna encounter a flat fee in other places too
Mhm.
besides taxis, right?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but then there's another opportunity to draw on where the students are coming from and what their culture is, and the community that they live in. So we were talking about the word per and like all the different words in this problem now that we've taken out the numbers and like what they mean. So we talked about flat fee. Your students may or may not know what that means. So that might need a little explanation. But what about this word per? You're a sixth grade teacher. So where else do we see that like per mile kind of language?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because we did just cover like a lot of ratios and rates kind of stuff. And so, you know, that makes me think about how like seeing the word per, like not right away multiplication, but just more of like a repeated thing for every certain amount of one thing, another thing happens. So there's like that relationship and getting students to pull that out. And that's obviously like what this question's asking for, is showing the relationship. So I think maybe
Yes.
emphasizing that and making that connection for them, man, that might really help. Yeah, making that connection.
Okay, cool. So I'm just capturing that in our session notes is to make that connection to what they remember in their prior knowledge. So like, so it's perfectly acceptable at this point, especially in sixth grade, to have them actually write out the word like total cost. So they know this is going to be a number.
Okay.
It's totally appropriate at first because you're what you're doing is you're like scaffolding it for them, but scaffolding in a way
Okay.
that's like, you're allowing them to make the representation the where it makes sense to them.
Okay.
Does that
That
make
makes
sense?
sense because yeah, like I think there's probably I think about my students and how there's probably some who would just want to put the T, and then there's others who'd want to write it all out and like giving them that freedom, especially because they just learned it. It's not like something they've been doing for years. And it's like, hey, at this point, we kind of need you to be able to just use the variable. They're just learning this. So that's actually really good. I think that just alone would be something that like would help some of my students, like give them that option. So um, yeah.
Right. And so in there, like the students are actually like you're positioning them as experts in their own learning because you're giving them the opportunity to represent it in the way that makes sense to them. All right. So you mentioned earlier that some of your students are shutting down, asking for help. Um, why do you think they do that? Turning
I
it around on
think
you.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of that for them, it's they don't know where to start, or
Mhm.
the words are maybe overwhelming, or um, they just kind of feel the pressure to get it right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So now I'm gonna turn it around and let's co-create some ways that you can teach you can meet this objective, the math objective, where everyone
Hmm.
has an entry point to the lesson. Do you know what I mean by entry point to a lesson?
Uh, yeah, I think like where they can start,
Yep,
like where can they can start
exactly.
with something on their paper.
Right, exactly. Because what that does is it makes them feel like it's almost like getting their engine going. Like they start to think, oh, okay, I do have something to contribute. I can engage
Okay.
in this task, right? And then what it teaches them is like if I can take one step, I can take another step and I can take another step.
Mm,
And it,
yeah,
it's progress, not perfection. We call this rinse and repeat. It's like they've got to experience over and over again in order to build up their confidence.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're consistent with it, I can promise you that it will make a big difference. So let's talk about how we could take this particular problem, this taxi cab problem, or these types of problems where they have to write equations to model relationships that has an entry
Hmm.
point for every student. And here's the other key, is meaningful to them and their life in the cities that they live in,
That's true. True.
right? Because a lot of times they're like, why do I need to know this? Right. And so just like in literacy class where it's like, well, why do I have to write a poem? Right. Well, if they have the poem written about their life or something they've experienced in their life, it becomes much more engaging. So we can do the same thing in math.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I just like, I guess maybe how do I like prepare for that?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
because it seems like I kind of like to have like structure, in my class. And so like where and like
Okay.
I do kind of tend to be like, let's get as much practice in as possible. So I'm just
Mm.
like kind of curious like where that would maybe fit in like a lesson.
Okay. So we're gonna co-create a way to purposefully practice, purposeful practice. Because there's practice where you're doing 40 problems, but then there's also practice where you're doing like five really meaningful problems. And if they really,
Yeah.
right? So five meaningful problems is even better than 40 problems that make no sense or mean nothing to students. What would be a situation where you would divide and subtract or
Yeah, like splitting up a group of people,
mm-hmm,
like someone leaves the group and then
mm-hmm.
they like you gotta break up into breakout rooms.
Oh, yes. Right. I like it. Okay. I'm just gonna jot that down. Breakout rooms. So like for example, you have like 100 people in a session and like 15 people leave and then the rest have to be broken up into five breakout rooms or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I would use that as like example of division, and then maybe so this would I guess be a good like example. So that could
Nice.
maybe be my example.
Mm-hmm.
And then like but still giving them like yeah, maybe that one could be the one that I start with. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let's make one all together,
Ooh, I like that.
right? And maybe guide them to this or something, and then give them their own chance to make their own. I'd
Mm-hmm.
just be curious, would you have them like um do it without because like we talked about numberless word problems, like would you have them not worry about numbers the first time, or would you like say you can pick numbers that you want?
What do you think would make more sense to your students?
I think like kind of how they currently operate, they would probably want to pick numbers, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think about how I could give them the option, right? You
Ooh, I
can put
like
numbers
that.
if you
Yeah.
want. You
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to put numbers, but you have to have a scenario like something that's happened in real world that can be turned into an equation. Would I state that out maybe
Yeah, exactly.
in
Right. Because what you're
instructions? We're
trying
trying
to
to make equations, so
yes, exactly. And then obviously the end goal is for them to have numbers in them eventually. But what's nice about numberless word problems is that you start off with the meaning of like what's happening with this word problem, and then and then you add the numbers in because now you've made sense of the problem. Does that make sense?
okay,
Sort of
makes
like
sense. Yeah, yeah. They're working backwards here, so this would be,
yes.
but maybe after like they make one of their own problems, then maybe it'll be easier for them to then write their own or then
Mhm.
write from problems already given, right? If they're
Mhm.
making the problem,
Right.
then it might be easier, hopefully. I guess I'll just
Yeah.
have to try it to then them have them write it. So
In this whole scenario, how is this positioning your students as experts as opposed to you being the expert in the classroom? Because at the beginning of the session, you said that your students are asking you questions like as soon as you pose the problem, they get like, wait, Mr. Pletta, I don't understand. How would turning it around where we're giving them purposeful practice, how does that position them as experts as opposed to being you being the expert?
yeah, I think it's like this scenario is like they have to make their own, but it also gives them like the freedom to make their own. And there's no like one right answer. So they're not like always like worried about it, maybe. And then hopefully, like if I do it enough, I'm sure I'll still get a lot of questions like the first time, but I'm thinking about, maybe if I do a second, third time, whatever, then students start to kind of understand and be like, I can just do this on my own and figure out what, um, make it whatever I want. And it does make me think about something that I do like to do in my classroom is not like make anyone feel bad for a wrong answer, And
Mm-hmm.
so like this is like a still, because that is a big thing that holds back a lot of students, is they're just afraid to make mistakes, you know. Um, I like this because it gives them a chance to really almost be free of like being wrong, you know, like because there's a lot of different things that they could choose. So
Awesome. So my question is, how are you going to get them to interact with one another in this space about this
yeah,
topic?
yeah, for sure. That's good. Yeah, definitely something I need to work on a little bit more is giving them space to like work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So oh, maybe I could have them like their table partner or whatever, you know, right next to them. They make the problem, they get it like, hey, this works. I give them like maybe a check off or something. I don't know. And then, okay, go ahead and swap with your partner and write their equation. Maybe that could be
Ooh.
like a way to get them engaging with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then like the first student also, oh, this is interesting too. The first student knows the answer, right, to the problem they wrote,
Mm-hmm.
or at least they should. and then, and then they, and then when they swap back, that person can like, or that part, the person who wrote it can say, yep, you got it, or no, you didn't. And then they can kind of talk about maybe why, like what was happening. So that might be, I don't know, that makes me a little nervous. Like there might be some, you know, hurt feelings or arguments, but you know, I think at least trading the problems would be good. So
Yeah, and it's also about like giving students like that time to kind of have productive arguments, for lack of a better word, in
yeah.
math, because they argue about issues in classes like social studies and maybe even science, but very rarely do we have students kind of like picking a fight with one another. There's actually I think I saw this online where it said like let's pick a math fight. And it's like it's
Okay.
okay for them to have disagreements in math class as long as they're kind to one another. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you have your classroom set up that way. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
it's okay
yeah,
to
I'm just
just,
taking some notes there, but yeah, this was good. This was good. I I like that kind of like left with something that I like am ready to basically, you know, put into this lesson that's, you know, coming up, and kind of got some things to really think about. I like that it's like planning ahead, and like kind of reflecting on how things are in my class and stuff like that. Um,
great.
so yeah, this was good. Thanks.
You're welcome.